Paul Schrader has, over the last many years now, become an icon in American cinema. He is the screenwriter of films such as Taxi Driver and Raging Bull and The Last Temptation of Christ for Martin Scorsese, also bringing out The Dead. And as a director, he has his own remarkable career with films like Hardcore, very famously American Gigolo, which is a beautiful touch point for tonight's screening, also Dog Eat Dog, First Reformed, and many others. O Canada is his latest film, and when you see it, it is not the history of our national anthem. It is something a little bit juicier, starring Richard Gere and Jacob Elordi, and Uma Thurman and others as well. And it, I think, shows what Paul Schrader does best, which is to dig into the sometimes dark but always truthful heart of his characters. In this case, it's very much a man looking back on his past. And it reflects, I think, what Schrader has been doing over the last several years, which is these incredibly intense character studies of people, usually men, who are maybe on the precipice of something that might be dangerous, but is always going to show them for who they truly are. It is just such a pleasure to watch this film and to watch what Schrader and Richard Gere do together after having made American Gigolo so many years ago. Paul Schrader has come to introduce O Canada to you this evening. Please join me in welcoming director Paul Schrader.
Thank you, Cameron. This film is a kind of a meditation on death. It kind of snuck up on me. I was very good friends with Russell Banks, and he had written a book called Affliction. I made a film of it, and we became very close. And he got sick. And I was having trouble myself with long COVID. And in the hospital 3 times in a year with bronchial pneumonia. I thought, oh boy. Is this how it's going to be? And I had not read Russell's book. I know he had researched and written a book about dying when he was healthy. So I thought I'd like to read Russell's book. It was called Foregone. And he ended up, through one of life's ironies, dying pretty much the way he had researched. Same types of cancer, same time frame, same medications, so forth. But he was still alive when I decided to make it, so I was able to correspond with him about the script, and that he died before I finished the script. But one thing he did say to me is, please go back to the title I wanted. And he wanted to call it O Canada. And it's because it's about the second life of a draft resistor who flees from the US to Canada. And but at the same time, this book, Foregone, came out. Richard Ford, who's also an upstate New York American author, had a book coming out called Canada. So now the publisher is looking at Canada in the same 3 months, and Richard Ford was there first. And so Russell had to change the title, but fortunately we were able to change it back to what he had originally intended. So I guess I'll be here afterward to answer any questions, whatever. Thank you.
Please join me in welcoming back to the stage Paul Schrader.
Could you pop this for me?
Sure.
I have things in my hands.
True North, strong and free. Thank you, Paul. I want to begin by asking about, you mentioned in the introduction, contemplating death, mortality. And it operates on a number of different layers. There's the book that you're adapting by Russell Banks, but there's also the leap in time between 1980, when you and Richard Gere worked together in American Gigolo, and now. And of course, that also gets us closer to mortality. Yeah. So just in talking about how you approach that subject, both with casting and with the original source material, can you talk about what that means to you now?
Yeah, that was 78. We shot it in 79, it came out. So it was a while back. And I stayed in touch with Richard, but we never worked together. He went through a period there where he blew up and was doing big films, big salaries, which is not what I do. And then I went through a period where I could have cast him, but I was now casting people like Ethan Hawke and Willem and Oscar Isaac. So when this came around, I was thinking about, because when you're casting a film, it's not enough to have a good actor. You have to have a buzz actor. You have to have top spin. So that when you mention the actor, you mention the project, people say, oh, that's interesting. And so any number of actors could have knocked this one out of the park. It's a fastball down the middle of the plate. And, Anthony Hopkins, Jonathan Pryce, Tommy Lee Jones, any of them. But they all have. And, if you say Anthony Hopkins plays a dying man, you say, well, yeah. Haven't we seen that already? Well, you sort of have, yes. And so I was thinking, but I said, Richard's never played dying. And he's 74, 75 now. I said, that's an interesting concept. That has a little buzz to it, the dying gigolo, And what I didn't realize was that how hard it was to make him look older. It's easier to make him look 60 than it is to make him look 80. He's 75. So we were at that quite a few weeks and makeup tests and all sorts of tests and finally touched him in the eye. I said, I wasn't happy. He looked healthy. And he said, I'm always the reddest person on screen. And he has a lot of melanin in his skin naturally. So that when you see him like bareback with a bronze kind of skin, that's his skin. He hasn't been lying out in the sun. That is his skin color. And once he said that to me, I said, oh, we got to put a white face. Put a white base on you, and then put makeup over the white. And then he looked sick.
He's just too handsome also, maybe that's it.
What?
He's just too handsome. I want to ask you about having Jacob Elordi and Richard Gere play the same character across decades. I imagine you had to work with them to develop something so they had similar behavior or gestures, movements, so that they would appear to be the same person. How did that go?
Well, we did rehearsals together, and I asked Jake to study Richard. But in the end, it was not that. he wasn't really mimicking Richard as much as I had hoped he would. The question is, I was looking to play Richard when he's younger. And I have a good friend, Bret Easton Ellis. He's a novelist. We did a film together years ago. And I was saying to Bret, I said, I'm trying to cast a young actor to play young Richard Gere. Bret has a idea fixe about American Gigolo. He's written about it. It's in his new book. He's talked about it for years. It was his coming out of the closet film. And he said to me, you're not going to find anybody to play Richard Gere. He said, if he's not out there, you're not going to find him. I said, well, I just saw a test with this young actor, Jacob Elordi. And Bret says, stop right there. I just came in my pants.
So you cast him.
So I cast him.
All right. I had a follow-up. I don't know if I need to ask it. I was curious to know if you had seen Euphoria or Saltburn or any of the other.
No, he just came through the pipeline as casting person, people suggesting, and I saw him do Test of a Scene. Then I started quickly. Saltburn hadn't come out yet, but so I started watching Euphoria. And, the big problem was, of course, the height differential. Jacob is a very large human being. And he's 6'5", which is not really a good thing for an actor to be. He's just too tall, He has to, whenever you see him in a movie, he's always sort of hunching over, he's sitting down. So I had to figure out how to, because I thought, if I were to cast American Gigolo, he'd be the guy I would cast now. But, so the casting was right, but the height differential had to be dealt with. And it wasn't, always successful. I mean, there's no way you can watch the film and not become aware that these people are, that this person got a lot shorter when he got older.
Not unusual. And also because it's Richard Gere and Jacob Elordi, you just suspend disbelief anyhow. You just want to watch these guys.
I hope you do,
Your films are known, going back to the screenplays you wrote for films like Taxi Driver and Raging Bull and others, but the films you made as a writer-director as well, for dealing with characters going through intense experiences, sometimes guilt, sometimes sacrifice, sometimes self-punishment. There's not as much of that here, but the themes of guilt do seem to come up.
Yeah, I mean, there's a kind of subgenre that I've kind of worked in, which is an extension of European existential fiction. It's an extension of Notes from the Underground, an extension of Nausea, an extension of L'Étranger, and into Bresson. And I've taken describing this as a man in his room, which is there are two characters, so a man, and then there's his room. And, it's this fellow alone in a very monastic room, writing in a journal, like pickpocket, like country priest. And he's wearing a mask. And the mask is his occupation. And he's waiting. He is just waiting. It's like, we started out with Taxi Driver at one point. Travis Bickle writes in his journal, You know, days go on, each day like the day before, one day after another, and then there is a change. And so it's all these kind of lonely men waiting for a change. And, you know, that usually is an instrument of someone entering into their lives. I'm writing another one of that genre now about a philosophy professor, but it's not what I'm going to shoot next. I thought that's a film noir. But I figured after doing 3 in a row, First Reformed, Card Connor, and Master Gardener, you know, critics, they like trilogies. They don't like tetralogies. So I said, I got to get off from that. And so I got off from that. I wrote a couple of scripts, 3 scripts off from that base, but now I'm going back to it again.
You're now making films independently and fairly quickly as well. You're able to make a film every year and a half or so, and largely outside the studio system. Does that give you more independence than you used to have?
Yeah, well, it all is because of digital. And the first time I realized this was I was trying to direct a film that Bret Easton Ellis had written, and it fell apart. And I said to Bret, you know, the industry is changing, the technology is changing. It's possible to DIY. You know, let's do it. You write a script. I'll direct it. We'll finance it. We'll just do it. And that film was called Canyons. I put in 80, and Bret put in 80, and the producer put in 80. We picked up the rest of the money, sold it for $1 million. And that made me aware that you could, that there was a new model possible. Because when I began directing, a film would be 42, 44, 46 days. Today it's 20, 21. It's half the time. But you get more raw footage in half the time, just because you don't waste all that time lighting, you don't waste all that time changing, loading film, and the camera never stops going. And so with this new technology, after I did Canyons, I realized that I could write. I had always been afraid to write a Bressonian script, even though he was my kind of lodestar as a critic, because I knew that if I wrote one, it would not get financed, and if it did get financed, it would flop. And I didn't need that on my CV. And I said, you know, I think I can make a Bressonian film financially viable in this new economic system we have. So I wrote First Reformed and got Ethan. And sure enough, you know, people got their money back. And I got Final Cut. And then I had Final Cut. And so my pitch, I have a group of people who, you know, help me out, finance me, but I work at a very low budget, so it's no great grief to them. And my pitch to them is really quite simple. I'm not going to make you rich, you know, and get that idea out of your head. But I'm going to make you a film that's very well received. I'm going to make you a film that you can mention at a dinner party and people will be impressed. I'm going to put you on a red carpet in either Cannes, Venice, or Berlin, and the odds are I'll make you whole. Now, would you rather be involved in this venture, or would you rather make more toasters and tires? And that's literally the pitch. And these guys who've had made millions upon millions in toasters and tires say, well, yeah, it'd be different, I'd be interested in doing that. And so that's how I sort of scrounge along. Now, all of that said, I do have an analog name. That does make a difference. I have a brand that was created pre-digitally. So it's possible to use that. If you're a film student right now, coming up in the digital era, it's not so easy. It's easier to make a film. All you need is your iPhone, you can make a film. $30,000, $40,000 you can make a film. It's virtually impossible to make a living. Whereas when I began, if you made a film, it meant it had to be a DGA film. It means you had to be paid DGA minimum. It had to be WGA minimum. So you made a living, even if the film flopped. Now, you can lose all your money, or your own personal money on a film. And young filmmakers are learning that lesson, as we speak.
Last question I want to ask you, Paul. Between the films that you made in the early years and the scripts that you wrote, where there were sometimes eruptions of violence, and how you think about violence and particularly the end of life now, what's changed?
Well, I walked in the door and a fight was going on. The cinema door. And you're talking about the 60s. It was an explosion of revenge and a burst of Bonnie and Clyde and all of that. The big one was the Charles Bronson one.
Death Wish?
Death Wish. That became the template for everything. So that when you were breaking in at that time, you wrote a violence. That was selling. And that has become less so in a bad way because it's become more cartoonish. It's all these sort of anonymous bad guys with Russian accents being blown away. It's not the violence of point blank. It's not the real gutty violence. But then I decided to get out of the violence racket because there was a cover of Saturday Evening Post, which was a large popular publication at that time, not Saturday Evening Post, Saturday Review. And a picture of myself and Brian De Palma and Walter Hill and Scorsese. And the title was The New Brutalists, about this trend in Hollywood. And I saw that cover and I said, you've got to change because they're trying to put a label on you. And they get that label fixed to you and you'll never get it off. So you got to just stop writing violence-driven material because as soon as they can put you in that pigeonhole, you're stuck there. And so that's when I started veering away from writing violence.
Paul, thank you. I would love to spend another couple of hours here talking with you about your films, but I'm glad you're here tonight.
Thank you.
And I'm glad for O Canada. Thank you so much. Paul Schrader, thanks so much for coming tonight.